Guys, welcome back to another episode of Monte Gem. Today, I'm excited to introduce a really good friend of mine, and I wanted to start this episode off by showing and sharing why this is such a good friend of mine, why I consider him such a good friend, and why I appreciate Isaiah so much. This is Isaiah Danberry. Number one is Isaiah's heart. So Isaiah has always been someone who's been super kind, compassionate, loving in others. And number two, he's always been open-minded. And I think oftentimes we don't think that those two things go together, but I think in actuality they do. And his heart and his empathy and compassion towards other, I think really has allowed him to have that open-mindedness to where when you're talking to him and maybe you have a different belief system than he does, he's always been someone who's been able to listen to what you have to say without interjecting his own ideas and opinions, and be able to consider it and then have deeper discussion. And that's what I'm excited about to be able to talk tonight, is to see where Isaiah currently is philosophically. We both come from a lot of the same I would say beliefs previously, and so just to see maybe where we've started connecting, or maybe we've drawn apart, and what we currently believe. So, Isaiah, we appreciate you for being on the podcast, man. And I think you hit mute on your phone.
Yeah, you're muted.
No, you're still muted.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
Hear me now?
Yep.
Well, thank you for the intro, Chad, and thank you for having me on.
Of course.
You're welcome, man. So, Isaiah, me and you, I guess, have some very deep religious background, and I guess the time that we'd spent together in my mid-20s, your teenage years. I mean, you were very, very young as you started diving deep into religiosity, or maybe Christianity, Messianic Judaism. So, you want to share with everybody kind of how you came into that religious belief system, and then maybe share where you've kind of came out of it and where you currently are. Like, take us to today. What does that look like?
Okay. So the religious background that I come from is the Messianic Hebrew Roots movement. We both crossed paths at Messiah Fellowship, a church that began as like a non-denominational church, and then drifted throughout the years, towards, they wouldn't identify as a member of the Messianic Hebrew Roots movement. Like, they wouldn't say that they fall within that identity, but they have a lot of things in common with them. I started taking that walk very seriously around the time I was 13, 14. That's when I would say I really started to think deeply about God and the impact of my actions, or how I should act, as well. And it started with me being very convicted about some particular aspects of my life, and I wanted to start taking that seriously, because that is how I was raised, as like the right thing. That's, if you're a good person, you follow in that path. But around 13, I was very, very convicted. I was having a lot of issues with like lust and stuff like that, and TV to me seemed like a big distraction. It's like, in retrospect, as a grown man, that's stuff that 13, 14-year-olds struggle with to begin with. They're going through puberty, starting to notice women and whatnot.
Yes, we do.
that led me to start taking the scriptures very seriously, start taking my faith or faith of my family very seriously. I soon adopted it as my faith. But yeah, so I had quit watching TV for almost a year, and I was reading the Bible a lot. I had started attending a men's Bible study on Wednesday nights. That's where I started hanging out with you and Phil Brothers, who had on the previous episode. Just in case the viewers forgot. I really like that dynamic because you guys were a lot younger than some of the other. Like you guys were older than me, but younger than other members of the congregation. You're kind of the cool, open-minded younger folk.
Yeah.
So,
and I think inside of that setting, you make a really good point because even though you were way younger than me and Phil, like me and Phil were still very young inside of that. And I think if, as I look back, like now and today, like just how old-minded I currently am, and a lot of it just has to do with all the people when growing up, like I wasn't really surrounded by people my own age. It was mainly people who were 10, 15, 20, 30 years older than me. And those are the type, and some people will ask like, why don't you want to go to that? And it's like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And it, like, I don't know if that has to do with growing up in Michigan where a lot of things don't make as much sense because you're very logical. But if we go back a little bit, right? So you were talking about at a very young age, you started feeling convicted. And so as you dive deep into what that means, do you think that those convictions came because of the religiosity or maybe the belief system that your family already held and maybe being convicted from the family setting? Or was there actually something inside of you where you felt led something by a closeness to a creator, or was it what you were reading? Where would you say, as you look back at that, those convictions came from? How did they come about?
I would say both. For example, around that time that this had happened, I remember just one day feeling very convicted about the lust. And I remember praying that God would he'd purify my heart, give me a new spirit. And that Saturday when we had attended, we would usually do like the Torah portions, but that weekend we were doing like Pastor Ron had kind of just given like a not like a sermon, but it wasn't so much Bible study setting. It was more so him. It was about sexual purity, and he had asked for God to send like purifying to the congregation to purify the congregation of that sexual impurity. And so I took that as like an answered prayer that, and I had never really felt like I had a prayer answered so directly.
Mm-hmm.
In retrospect, like there were some other things going on in the fellowship at that time. Like there was, I don't know if you remember it or not. I don't want to go into detail about that. There was like an adult who had done some inappropriate things to his stepkids, and in context, that's what he was talking about that night. That had happened, and that was a terrible thing, and God needs to send purification to the church. And so, as somebody who's agnostic now and deconstructed, I look back at that, and I still do believe that things happen for a purpose. And regardless if that was like a miracle, God sending like purification to my heart, that was a significant time that was the beginning of a very long journey of thinking about the Creator and looking at my actions, being intentional about how I act and how I think. So at the time, I would have had a totally different interpretation of that. Now, I view it differently, but I do still see it as significant. Does that make any sense?
It does. And the main reason I ask is because I think whenever you're in a religious setting and you start having beliefs, you have the scriptures, one, that you compare your life to, right? What's going on in my life? and how do I stand up to what God expects of me, let's say, right? And so I thought about, Messianic Judaism, like the tzitzit thing that came up, which this, for anyone who doesn't know, and if you see Jews washing around, you see the 4 strings hanging from their garment, that's specifically what I'm talking about. And as you're looking at the scripture and you're seeing what it says, and then you see other people in your community wearing these things, sometimes mentally, I start wondering as I look back now, and I can look down at that, did I do that because of peer pressure, or because I was worried about what other people thought of me? Or did I do it because this is the answer I think that I have, and I believe, and I hope that this is what it was, is because I felt like I really feared God, and that I was really scared. And I don't know if this is a really good approach in how we should look at our belief systems or our religious life, is that I did it out of fear.
Oh, absolutely.
And there's, I think it's really difficult to not do that, because if you are a believer and you believe that the Bible is true, to not look over that with a fine-tooth comb and try to compare yourself that and have that perfectionist life, which I still very well struggle with. Maybe it's not so much in a religious setting, but it's every other aspect of life, like trying to be a perfectionist to a T, because I want to be perfect, and coming from that. And so mainly that's why I ask you, as we look outwardly from so long ago, sometimes it's just really difficult to try to key in those things. But I think you always have to try to look deep inside your heart and try to figure out, what was I feeling? What was it that got me to that?
That's a good point. I would say fear was a very present emotion at that time. And it was a very present feeling throughout my childhood. Like, we were homeschooled, and a big driving force behind that was my parents really feared the public schooling system, feared the broader system, thought, we would be indoctrinated. They had fears of, like, they would tell us, like, Christians get shot at school and, like, crazy stuff like that. So fear was a very, like, it was very present there. Yeah.
And it's, again, for me, like, coming from such a small town in Michigan and coming down here to Miami, Florida, like, there was a lot of fear. Like, I thought this is a really bad city, super dangerous, which the longer I'm down here and the more that I see things happen and stuff, it's like, yeah, mentally it can be really, really destructive. So you talked about being in homeschool, and this is something Jake and I have talked about. We grew up in the private school system, and as I look at life and become a grown man, I see some obstacles that I've been faced with when it comes to dealing with society and maybe my own self-confidence and stuff. Like, what are your thoughts on being homeschooled and how that's equipped you to live in society, and maybe how you feel about it today if you were to have kids? What would that look like?
I definitely think that homeschooling can be a very good thing. I think that there's many families that we both knew that did it very well. Personally, I wouldn't, just because I guess I'm not in I'm not in the place to where I feel like that would be the best option. Like, I don't have that opinion about the public school system. Perhaps that's out of ignorance. It's Plus, I don't think I have the disposition for it. Like, not everybody has what it takes to be a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I think for my parents in particularly, like, I love them, but this is my honest opinion, is that I think they really liked the idea of homeschooling as opposed to the lifestyle of homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was like maybe that's going into too much.
No, so I'll say this, and some of the things, maybe the big key factors that are relatable to me in being in the private school is rejection. Dude, rejection, I don't like it. As I get older, I'm really trying, and now I'm just here by myself and realizing that I'm all alone. Like realizing that I have to go through rejection to be able to have success, to be able to be accepted. And that was something
Yep.
that just being in a small group of people and not really getting to feel, or feeling like, okay, if I get rejected, maybe it's in class by getting the wrong answer, or by asking one of the three girls that were in my class out and getting rejected or something like that. Everybody else sees it. And so when we
Right.
go out and we separate ourselves into the actual world, there's a million other people here in Miami. So if I get rejected by, let's say, one female, well, okay, I don't like, dude, it really scared me. Like, it's like, oh, okay, like everybody sees that. They like, I just don't like getting rejected. And so I was wondering, like, those types of things. And it also, in terms of pursuing jobs, like for me, I've seen that there's such a huge opportunity to just go out and not be afraid to apply to jobs, go show up to jobs, be able to work on your verbal skills, and to be able to essentially increase your net worth by just going on interviews and setting yourself up. But previously, I was very, very scared of that rejection, and I felt like I had to be perfect and those types of things. And so those are what really resonate with me in terms of being in the private school system, and I guess just this huge fear of making mistakes, mainly because of how I would be maybe. And I think maybe that's different in homeschooling, because I don't think there was the making fun of or the joking around or anything like that. So maybe you never experienced those types of things. But I wonder if maybe like just the awkwardness of maybe the insecurities of not really having other friends or people around, like how that feels. Like, do you resonate with any of those things, or?
Well, so there wasn't like school bullies, but there was this aspect where it was like feeling like you were trapped at home with a bunch of people that you didn't feel like liked you or liked each other, and they're also your family members. That was definitely, I can't absolutely say that's how it was, but that's how it felt, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're a kid, you perceive things a certain way. You have memories of it as an adult, and you apply your perspective of an adult to your memories, and it kind of paints a picture, you know? But that's definitely how I felt about my family growing up being homeschooled.
Okay.
Like, now something like, you know, me and Darla will go visit her family, and everybody's giving hugs. You know, they say, "I'll love you" when you leave. It's like that's like super awkward for my family, and it's like it's just really weird growing up without a really abundance of that as a kid. And it kind of like you carry that feeling into everywhere you go. Is all these people, you instantly feel like these people don't like me. You always feel like an outsider.
And when you share something like that, you're talking about physical touch. Is physical touch difficult for you, based on what you were sharing with like going over to Darla's family and doing that? Or are you talking about just like maybe the verbiage that gets used?
I wouldn't say so, no. Like, because I try to be very intentional about giving what I didn't get, whether that be to my friends, to my wife. You know, I'm much more like endearing. I'll compliment my friends. I'll tell, just because I didn't feel like I had a lot of that growing up from loved ones, or I didn't have that.
That's a really good point, man. Because I think that's one thing for me, is that I encouraging each other is really, really important. Maybe because I didn't hear it as much as I would have liked. I think sometimes we can have earplugs on, and maybe we don't hear the encouragement that actually comes from our loved ones and how they maybe try to exert their love languages on us. And so maybe sometimes, even though I didn't feel loved, my parents, my family did the best that they could to try to love me. But yeah, I can completely resonate with what you're sharing and trying to encourage and inspire other people, if like maybe words of affirmation are your love language. So coming out, we got to a point where you're maybe like 17, 18.
One thing I would like to say is like I absolutely, I am sure that my parents do love me. I think they're just, parents, they're kids that grew up and had kids. There's anxiety and stress issues that I've encountered as an adult that I see in my parents. And it explains a handful of things that I experienced problems with that growing up that we'll probably go into further on. I did want to point that out.
Oh yeah, no, of course. And I think the important thing as we talk about these things, looking at people's intentions, right? So I think all the people that I met in maybe the religious setting to where I don't 100% fully agree with it, I don't think that I ever saw someone that had impure intentions in terms of trying to play out their religious beliefs in the best way that they possibly could. Do you? Oh, do you think you did?
Well, define impure intentions.
I guess maybe their intentions were trying to take advantage of someone or to try to maybe manipulate others or anything like that.
Oh, we had to have encountered it at least a handful of times.
Yeah, you think so?
For sure, yeah.
Okay. I just think that, all the people that I think that just like, I'm sharing maybe, my childhood trauma, maybe the things of my parents, how they loved me differently than maybe I would have wanted or anything like that. It's always seemed that people have tried to do the best that they really know how to do, as no matter how goofy I look back and those religious perspectives and, kind of what I believed or maybe what other people believed. And again, maybe I haven't probably ran into a lot of these people that maybe you have, but even so, some of the hardships that I went through inside of the church that we went to after my Messiah Fellowship, and some of the things that, oh man, were just made my life somewhat miserable. I can see the intentions and where those things came from. And I don't think that the intentions were ever to try to hurt me or to manipulate me or anything. I just don't think that they were brought about in maybe the right approach, or maybe my interests weren't at the top of the priority list in terms of that.
For sure, I can see where you're coming from with that. Like, even with like some of the leadership dynamics we experience at Messiah Fellowship, like I'd like to think that they're all good people and they had the best of intentions. They just, like, we all have an ego, and sometimes that is an obstacle. Well, not sometimes, all the time. It's a huge obstacle.
Yeah.
In doing that thing that's being a better person.
And so I guess, yeah, in order to kind of progress on, so after you were maybe the 17, 18, how does your life continue to move forward in terms of your religious beliefs and kind of to where you currently are?
So we attended the church that had shifted from a non-denominational to Hebrew roots. And we were attending that church till I was around 16. And then we had moved to another church, City on the Hill, the church that you had previously spoken of. And they only met every other Sabbath, like 2 Sabbaths a month. So that gave us kind of an opportunity to branch out and visit other congregations, other people. And one that we started to go to was a group up in Kalamazoo, where we had went there for a while without realizing it, but these people actually didn't believe that Jesus, or what we called him at the time, Yeshua, was the Messiah. And they actually were meeting with a Hasidic rabbi, and they would have meetings. They would have him over to their house to teach. There was a book he was doing on the 7 laws of Noah. Sometimes he would just do like a book about gratitude, a book about Emunah. And so that for me was a big shift, because the mentality of the church that we had previously attended, Messiah Fellowship, the leadership was they were very close-minded, very, like, fear was a driving force behind the close-mindedness. It's like, oh my God, we can't read those scriptures, that are by, like, the Jews, because they don't believe in Jesus as the Messiah. There's just so much, like, fear behind that closed-mindedness, and that was a huge shift for me. Not only was I able to hear an Orthodox Jewish perspective, the people that would have him attend their house, they weren't Jewish; they were Noahides. They had used to be Messianic, but had deconstructed from that. And so that was probably a very pivotal part for me in terms of questioning the widely accepted narrative, because that was such a huge divergence from what I was used to or okay with, which challenged me, because there's these people that are very good people, loving people, very well studied people, and they don't believe in Jesus, and that for the longest time was taught to me to be a bad thing. So now I'm in a little dilemma.
And how did you solve that dilemma? Like, what did that look like? What did that mental approach? What did the physical approach? Where did you go from there?
Well, so the pattern of, like, I've always loved studying, and so it wasn't just study, because, like, for probably from age 13 to 16, I just strictly read the Bible. In terms of, like, my scriptural studies, I didn't really read any commentary or anything outside of that. So me and my friend, who was having the rabbi attend his house for study, he would lend me books that he had studied, and I'd read them, and I would read some books on my own. And I think by age, I'd say 19, I'd say I didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah anymore, in terms of one second. Can we pause this real quick?
Yeah. Yep.
I got to get something.
Going.
All right.
Had to go put my dog away.
That's all right.
Like, in his house?
No, she was standing at the doorway whimpering, and I just put her down in the basement.
Oh, okay. Because when you say you put her away or put her down, I was like, oh, dude, like, what edit that out for you, Isaiah? No. Okay, so at about 19, you decided that you didn't believe that Yeshua was the Messiah anymore. Can you share with us how you came to that conclusion and what it looked like?
So keep in mind, I'm just a guy from Colon, Michigan, that has a lawn care business. I don't have any, like, academic studies in scripture or anything of that sort. I'm just somebody who's loved to read scripture, then the books giving commentary to them, even to this day. It's something I still study and entertain myself with. But to me, it didn't seem clear that, like, the basis in there's a lot of different ways I could go with this. So, like, the passages that the New Testament often use in terms of stapling messianic prophecy in the Old Testament in terms of Jesus. Like, oh, this was talking about him. They're very largely, usually taken out of context, such as in the psalm where it says, sit at my right hand till I make my enemies your footstool. You know, got that's quoted that's talking about the Messiah. In context, King David wrote that, and it has nothing to, like, nobody even prior to the New Testament perceived that to be a messianic prophecy. The most commonly used one, Isaiah 53, in a broader context, is talking about Israel. But aside from like using the Old Testament as an example, with the New Testament and the narrative that we have, it really doesn't seem like it. The more I studied, I was led to believe that it didn't seem like even the narrative, the Jesus that we have painted in the New Testament is like authentic to who Jesus really was, in terms of, like, we have older gospels that don't have a virgin birth story. Like, they begin at Matthew, I believe it's chapter 3, when Jesus is baptized. And then I found out that, yeah, there was sects of Christians, such as like the Ebionites. They're a sect of Christians that their lifestyle was much more Jewish. They didn't really have a faith-based view of salvation, but it was, again, more works-based. They claimed to follow, like, the teachings of James rather than Paul. Like, they held James in higher esteem than they held Paul.
Which, in terms of that, I mean, if you look at James's writing compared to Paul's writings, they're a lot easier to understand, and it seems like there's a lot more application in those that we can take and actually apply to our lives. And I think the same way with Jesus, right, is that if we live out the way that he walked, whether someone believes in the Messiah or they don't, like, they're going to end up being a good person. And I think, today it's like, what would Jesus do? I think that's still a great slogan in terms of how we apply our lives and stuff. That was just kind of more so in terms of the writing. Okay, so you came from that mindset to where you didn't believe Jesus was Messiah. Take us to where you currently are today, and what your belief system looks like, and how you've navigated through that to get there.
Okay, all right. So I started to have different views on Jesus than the rest of the congregation. Like, we were still going to City on a Hill. We were still, like, fellowshipping with a lot of messianic people when my views were starting to change. I really kind of repressed a lot of that. I didn't, like, I would focus more on, like, I'd talk about, let's focus on mercy, justice, and faith. Because though I saw Jesus differently than the rest of the people did, I still, okay, let me backtrack a little bit in the sense of, like, you're familiar with the term Messiah ben David, Messiah ben Joseph?
Yes. Jake, are you? Okay, so explain it.
So the rabbis, they came to this conclusion that the Old Testament talks about the Messiah fulfilling two different roles, right? He'll either come as Messiah ben David, form of a conquering king, or Messiah ben Joseph. Ben means son in Hebrew. Where Joseph, he was a suffering servant. Joseph, he suffered. He went through the tribulations that he had went through being sold into slavery by his brothers and then thrown in prison in Egypt. But all of that happened so that he could bring salvation to many people. So I still believe that Jesus was Messiah in the sense that he came to suffer for people, like so that people will be saved. I didn't know what that salvation was, though. I didn't know if it was saving people in the sense of through Jesus, like 90% of the world had found out about the God of Abraham. It was very like it started to get very vague, which vagueness isn't like in terms of a faith where you have to having belief in this narrative is like salvation. It's pivotal. So I didn't really talk about that stuff. But I still, I still believed in the Bible. I still believed in like the Torah as being God's authority. I still observed Torah, but I would say at this point I had started to hold the writings of the rabbis, even if it was like something by Rabbi Shlomo Arush. I started holding that in higher regard than like anything of any like Christian origin. No, because in my mind,
Like Bill Gothard?
what?
Like Bill Gothard?
No, I never really liked him. I would say more so like in terms of like Messianic Hebrew roots teachers, like Rico. Oh, I'm kind of running a blank on some of the names of them.
Brad Scott.
Brad Scott, yeah.
Uh,
I got less interested in like their teachings and more interested in things of like a rabbinic source. And then from being more interested in things of a rabbinic origin, I moved from, I guess, more like I started listening to Bart Ehrman. You familiar with Bart Ehrman?
he's an expert in like Hebrew writing, right? He's like a Hebrew.
He's a New Testament scholar.
Okay, then I have heard his name. I'm not as well versed as I thought I was.
A very pivotal, like a very pivotal part though was meeting the Blairs, the family that they were, I guess we'd call them Noahides, and then meeting the Rabbi Holler. He's the Hasidic rabbi that we would go to their house to study with. And just throughout my life, I started meeting more and more people of like other faiths. Through my dad had a HVAC business that I'd worked for a little while, and over in Coldwater we have a huge Muslim community, and my dad at times he would go and work over there for installing a furnace at a Muslim individual's house. And me being the inquisitive person that I am, I would start talking to them about their faith and start talking to them about my faith. And throughout time, it just seemed like the answers aren't so clear.
And were there answers to specific questions that you were talking about? Or when you say answers, what do you mean here?
The Messiahship of Jesus, the more you study it, it's not so clear. The authentic Jesus, historically, the more you study that, it's not so clear. The more you take a critical approach or historical approach to the Bible, it's not so clear. And then you add in that talking to individuals of varying life philosophies and faiths that they believe with just as much certainty as yourself or most of the individuals you grew up with, that what they're taught's the right thing, that this is the true thing. But the one thing that they did have that we all had was that hope, true, sincere hope and sincerity that this is the right thing that they're doing. So the hope was evident, but as far as like the answers to the inerrancy of the Bible or these huge claims that most religions are founded upon that separate them from people that live relatively same, when you take away like the theological aspect and you like look at them as like people practicing practical wisdom, living out practical wisdom. We all live very similarly, but we have these claims about God that are vastly different, and that's where we separate. And so that I started to kind of, I feel like I was agnostic before. I feel like I was agnostic before I admitted to myself that I was agnostic. Like I would try to take these different approaches to make the Bible fit or Jesus fit into this new understanding that I had of the Bible, and I felt like I was holding on. I was holding on to something that, if I was being 100% honest with myself about, perhaps I didn't believe it anymore. But I was, again, the aspect of fear. It's a scary thing. It's a completely, not completely, but in vast ways to walk away from not only the belief system that gave you a sense of belonging, but the people. Because with walking away from that belief system, you lose the thread that held you together with all these people.
Yeah, because if there's nothing else that you lose from that system that we're talking about, is that, a lot of people may not be able to comprehend where you go to a normal Christian church and it's like, it wasn't that. It was much deeper. It was much more tight knit community, almost like a family versus a commune. Like, still, I would say I could still reach out to a lot of those people inside of that community, and I really would say that they're just like family. That if I was in deep, dark need, that I could expect any of those people to be right by my side to be able to help me out. Maybe not so much since I've been outside of that community for so long now, but when I was in it, that's what it was. Like those people, they were like taking a bullet for you. Like it was very, very deep in their terms of their love and admiration. And so I think sometimes a lot of people can't comprehend that. And I think with that, sometimes our eyes can get covered because that strength in that community is what can really cause us, maybe sometimes our minds to be skewed based on our beliefs and how we seek out, what our beliefs are like, and being open-minded and trying to consider those things.
Right. After a while, I felt like I had like a confirmation bias. Like I was afraid of letting go of this group. I was afraid of letting go of this belief system. And so it was inhibiting me from being able to admit to myself. I was lying to myself, at this point.
And you've shared that you're agnostic. What does that mean, and what does that look like to you?
So agnostic, I believe it's Greek for to not know. You might hear of some spiritualities that they are Gnostic, not agnostic, but Gnostic. That means that like the Kabbalah, that's a Gnostic belief system, in the sense of it's about discovering hidden knowledge. There's hidden knowledge, hidden meanings. And so to be agnostic means to have no knowledge. So I believe in God. I believe that we have purpose, but I don't think that we have knowledge of who God is. I don't think God can be understood. That doesn't keep me from, like, I still do think about God very much. And I'm just, I guess, more open-minded about, it's not that I don't put him in this box that he has to fit into. Oh, and I don't call him he. It's, it's not, it's like, I believe Moses Maimonides said it, but also it was very, excuse me, very common with Plato. Like, he had this belief in this God who was big, it was unknowable. Like, the only thing you could say about God was what he's not. Because as far as what he is completely unknowable. He's an unmoved mover, and it's mysterious.
And I guess thinking in that aspect, my next question was going to be, when you say he don't relate to him as a he, is it that he is an object? It's that he is a thing. But I guess if you can't understand those things, that question is irrelevant, right?
Yes. It's like asking. It's like going to the North Pole and asking which way is north.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about that, and then you look at the Bible and you look at all these stories where it seems like people have talked to God and the supreme being, like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, what are your thoughts onto why we would have this book, why it was written as so, why we have these stories? What's the purpose? You have any ideas for that? Or
Well, I would say that's specific to the book. Like, excuse me, the Gospels, for example, they are created to draw a certain narrative about Jesus, tell the story of his passion, but also to define a Christology, a view of Christ that the church fathers chose that we were going to recognize as the orthodox view of Christ. The epistles they're letters that Paul wrote to inform various churches about his Christology, but also his rulings and how a Christian should act. So I would say it depends on the book.
what
Like,
about
in
like the Old Testament?
the Old Testament, So I would view most of the stories probably as myth, and I don't mean myth in the sense to like dismiss it, but like a myth it's a story that a culture tells about itself, right? And not only that, but there are principles that culture believed in upholding. Like when you wanted to mass teach a group of people about something and you didn't, they couldn't read, most people couldn't write, you created stories to deliver a certain message, to deliver a certain principle. And I almost wonder if that is at all very different from how the Israelites or people back in Jesus's times viewed those stories. Did they because the more like pagan cultures, the Greeks, the Romans, whatnot, I don't I I don't think they really believed in their mythology either. Like, they recognized that these were cultural stories created to deliver a certain message. As far as books like the prophets or the Torah, I'm not entirely sure why some of my speculations are, when the Torah is believed to be mostly written while the children of Israel were in exile in Babylon. And you would see this happen frequently throughout history, that there would be this vast empire and other smaller nations, in order to be recognized by this empire as a nation and not like a small tribe, but as a nation, so they could get, some of the good things that a city state can get from being recognized as a city state from the empire. And so they would, from a variety of oral tales and oral traditions, gather together a cultural story to kind of cement themselves as this is our people. And so I think that might have been what was going on with the Torah and the prophets, giving the stance that it was written while they were in exile in Babylon, from Babylon until it went from Babylonian Empire to the Persian Empire.
And what about this? In terms of your current belief system, being agnostic, do you believe that the Bible has any purpose for your life? Is it helpful? Is there any application to currently take away from it? Or is there another book, theory, or belief system that you've found more helpful to your current journey?
It absolutely does have a place in my life. Like I still read the Bible. I still listen to the Bible. I listen to it more in audio form while I'm working than reading, because just that's mostly how I do my learning nowadays. But I definitely see various parts of it having being a great source of wisdom. The Gospels and the teachings of Jesus, you're gonna live life more abundantly if you just follow the practical teachings of Jesus. Supernatural beliefs set aside, practically it's wisdom, and that's kind of what I put the emphasis on my life philosophy on now, is living more wisely. I would say the basis of my morality now is well-being. I feel like if you don't have "because God said so" in the picture, I think that's a good basis for morality, is well-being. Does it take away from my well-being, or does it take away from the well-being of other humans? And if it does, perhaps that's wrong. Perhaps that's evil. If it adds to the well-being of myself and other humans, perhaps that's wise. Perhaps that's good.
Do you have any examples of "because God said so" that has taken away from your well-being and the well-being of others? Can you give us maybe some examples that I may not think about?
Um, this isn't so much about my like trying to think of one.
Okay.
Well, for example, eating pork, celebrating the biblical festivals, those things in particular, the focus of that is mostly supernatural. And I guess it wouldn't be taking away from somebody's well-being, but it's a law that the only basis of it is in supernaturalism, to where I try to take a more naturalist approach to the code that I live by now, as opposed to a because God said so basis.
And so you brought up like the issue with pork, right? And so I guess for me, as I look at it just from a health standpoint, so I don't eat pork, mainly for religious reasons. But if I look at the proteins and just the chances for disease inside of it, it doesn't seem as beneficial to my body. And so when you talk about a supernatural approach to that, is there anything like that comes to mind? I guess I'm just struggling to try to comprehend what that would look like when you say supernatural.
No, because I would agree with you that that was the basis for like that law being created. Like I don't believe that it was God given, but I do believe like the laws defined in the Torah, it was based on what they viewed was in line with the natural order of things. So don't eat these nasty, dirty animals. Don't sleep with animals. Don't have sex with people the same because they, that went against the natural order of things in their mind.
Okay. And the other thing I think about, like Yom Kippur, still a very special holiday to me, mainly because it causes me to do self retrospection. And I know that I'm trying to be the best person I can possibly be, but I also know that I'm not perfect. And I make mistakes. And sometimes the things that I do to other people and how I hurt them, or maybe the things I say, how it affects them, can just blow right by. And so that day still, I don't know, I find really great connection to it. And I think there's a reason
Absolutely. And
that
that's a good thing.
I think there's a reason that God made it to where it's just one day, because previously I could get really down on myself each and every day, every time I made a mistake. And it's not meant for us to be like that. And He set aside one day for us to go into our minds and really do that self introspection and say, dude, Chad, like, how can you be better next year? Like, who can you forgive? Who can you ask for forgiveness? Like, and doing those things. And I guess for me, that's just how it's applicable today. Maybe another question, as you in something I'm considering being a hindrance in my life, is, do you think it's possible to be too open-minded, Isaiah?
I would say it's dependent on the context.
Okay.
Like as far as who created us, I don't really set any limits on. Like again, I don't accept any specific narrative of who God is and why He created us, but I will entertain ideas like, oh, there's the Hindu concept of Maya, there's the simulation theory, there's so many different ideas and theories of where we came from. I'll entertain any of them. I won't accept anyone in particular, but I'll discuss them, think about them. I'll get intrigued by some more so than others, but at the end of the day, I don't think there's, and this is my big takeaway with becoming an agnostic and deconstructing from my faith, is if looking at it honestly, I don't think that there's any one that has more convincing argument than the other. Bias is stripped aside, like the bias, and this is what I grew up in, or the bias being these are my people. I don't think, whether it's Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, in terms of the who are we, what's the universe, I don't think there's one that presents convincing evidence as being more compelling than the other. There are ones that, in my opinion, seem like a more intriguing, deeper, interesting view than others. But as far as like provable, I would say they're all the same. Convincing, yeah, there's some that are more convincing than others. But I think the best approach is to say, I don't know. Because oftentimes I think perhaps God is like, we're like ants. And, an ant, they live out in our driveway, they live in our yard, they're aware of our presence. These giant behemoth human being creatures that tromp around their ant hills and run over their ant hills with lawnmowers, and they're aware of our presence, but they don't understand us. They don't know anything about us. They're aware that we're there. They're aware of our existence, but they don't know us. And so, like, I do think we have a creator, and I don't doubt the religious experience. I doubt the inerrancy, the inerrant claims that often come from the religious experience. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I think when you talk
Like,
about the inherent claims, it talks about the agenda and the manipulation that can come from this religious belief system, where the people in the top can use it as a power play and start manipulating people and cause big issues that I think me and you have both faced inside of this religious mindset. I agree with you 100%. My As I grow older, I see that my life seems to become more stable and peaceful the more structure that I add to it. The more that I determine that I'm going to stay away from going out and drinking and going out and partying and waking up at 4:30 every day and going to the gym and hitting the weights hard just like you are and showing your body what you can do and going home and feeding my body with great nutrients, removing sugar, any of those other things. The more that I do these things, the more that I get my mind right, the more that I'm focused on one specific goal, the more stability and structure I just have in my life. I seem more happy. Whereas previously, when I was just out considering everything and anything, like especially down here in a big city, each and every day there's an opportunity for me to go do thousands of things. This conference, this baseball game, this basketball game, go play volleyball here, go play volleyball there, like all the options. It's unlimitless, man. And once I'm just like, ugh, I have to go like this. And once I narrow, I've seemed to have more success. The second thing,
I agree with you with that. I don't think, like, in terms of metaphysical beliefs, I don't think you can be too open minded. But like, I could be too open minded in terms of where I put my money. I could be too open minded in terms of, like, I think that is where the danger in being too open minded merges its head. It's when it harms our well being.
and when you say you maybe not so much into metaphysical beliefs, could you maybe trying to explain that in layman's terms? Help me understand what you're saying with that a little bit more.
Metaphysical beliefs?
Yeah. Or let me preface it in saying, how do we determine the difference between right and wrong without having structure in our metaphysical beliefs?
Well, well being. To me, that seems like the best basis is like, okay, like, for example, don't point the speck in your brother's eye till you examine the plank in your own eye. Judge not, yes, lest ye be judged. Like, I feel like if somebody does that, they're going to have, like, it's going to maximize their well being. They're going to have a better life. If their first response is to look inwardly when they have a problem with someone, to look in themselves and see, maybe there's something that I'm projecting onto this whole situation that is tinted. It's like sunglasses tinting my eyes, and it's a flaw in me. That 10 times out of 10 is going to lead to a good outcome. Not lying. If I lie to you and you catch me in a lie, you're probably, for at least some time until I've regained your trust, you're going to question everything I say. And the more people get recognized as liars, the more tainted their reputation will be in the community. And not only that, the more you lie, the more you have to, lies require maintenance. You have to remember, if I lie to you, I have to remember what I said to you.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell the truth, you never have to remember what you said, because the truth doesn't require maintenance. If I'm just telling you the truth, I don't have to be like, okay, I told Chad this one thing and he believes that. And, I don't have that weighing on my mind constantly. So I would say what I ask myself is, does that lead to me living life more abundantly? And sometimes, it's not a black and white thing. It's not. And that's the difference between now and then, is I saw the answer as black and white, to where now I don't see the answer as black and white anymore. It's a lot more gray. There's some things that are obviously good and obviously bad, but then there are some things that are gray. Does that
Do you
make
have any examples of some things that are gray?
The first example I thought of was political, and I don't really want to take that route.
I guess maybe a simpler one would be the effects of video games on someone's mind. Could we agree that might be a gray area, or the effects of social media?
Yeah. It's more. Yeah. It would be more gray.
Okay, because this is the thing, is that I used to think when I owned a clothing line that social media played a huge role, and that it was what I had to have in order to make that clothing line successful. And now, as I look back of it, and I'm in management and in a much higher position than I've really ever been, I see the importance on one-on-one communication. And I think, yes, there is an opportunity, no matter what your product is, especially if it's a small product like a piece of clothing, that yeah, you can reach a much broader audience through social media.
Mhm.
But you can have a much greater impact on people by selling clothes at a market where I get to speak like this to Isaiah, and I can have a deep connection with you, and I can share my line and how it resonates, and how it feels, and I can talk to you, and you can actually see the owner face to face. And so for me, social media was just it could have destroyed me, man. Just always comparing myself to other people, being that perfectionist, always wanting to try to be what people wanted me to be, like always asking like how can I gain more friends, what could I do? And it just messed with my mind. So being away from it, I found myself being much more free to just try to experience the thing that Chad enjoys doing on a daily basis, and say,
Right.
what would I like to go do today? What would Chad like to go do today? Not what could Chad go to today to have this person accept him, or to fit in at this circle, or any of these things. And so I found myself just like seeing what Chad really wants to do. And so it was something that I used to consider a gray area, whereas now I don't know, it's currently in my mind, it seems like it's really, really destructive to society as a whole.
Right. So, like, one example, and I think you're I don't know how you feel about it, but I think you're open minded enough to like talk about it. Like, so, like, usually if you're a fundamentalist believer, you're gonna be more politically conservative. Issues like the transgender dilemma, like your instant case is gonna be, well, that scripturally is wrong. And so as somebody who's agnostic, to where I try to have my basis be well-being. Does it add to or take away from well-being? And there's things like that to where it's like, I would say that's a good example of a gray area. Is like, I have a lot of conservative friends that have very like negative views of transgender people. Will say a lot of hateful things and whatnot. My approach is like, I don't know what it's like to be in their mind. I don't understand what it's like to have that human experience, but they are having a human experience. And so I think that grace is the best option to take with that. It's just showing, like, we're all having a human experience that, perhaps the other doesn't understand. And there's things like, that, for example, where like lying, killing, I would say those are very evident yes or no, right or wrong issues, to where like things like that, maybe in terms of like someone's sexuality or gender, I would say is more gray, because in situations like that, it doesn't necessarily seem to take away from their well-being. Does that make any sense?
It does, and I completely can understand where you're coming from. The only time where I would say could start having a concern is if I have children and they're in third or fourth grade, and these types of things could be being influenced upon them to try to figure out who they are at a young age.
Right.
That
I
could be a little concerning to me. And so when we come to an issue like this that seems like it could be a gray area, it's like, well, how long does it stay a gray area? When does it begin? When does it end? What are the limitations on it? Do we not set any limitations on it? Like, it's like with our borders, right? In the United States, like, okay, what do we allow in? What do we separate? Do we let anybody from any other country come in here, no matter what their credibility is, no matter what laws they've broken, what they've done? Like, and that's where I'm talking about, like, that structure is that we have to have, it seems like we have to have something. And so for me, that's, I would say, yeah, I still believe in God, and I hold very, very closely to a lot of these beliefs, even though I don't identify myself as a Christian or a Messianic or a Jewish. But a lot of that, Isaiah, has to do with the hurt that I have from the people that have been inside of those religious belief systems. Not so much that I don't believe in God and I don't want to gravitate to a Jesus character, but it's because of the hurt that I felt from those three religious systems, and it's still deep within me. And I don't want to take upon that label because of how I feel like I've been treated from those things.
And that's a good point.
And sometimes I wonder, like, when we go down these journeys, like some of the things and these hurts and these travels and these trials and these tribulations of people who identify as this or they identify as that, like, what are the deeper root causes that we're just struggling with? Like, maybe it's not so much about these labels that we're putting on people in terms of whatever it is, they're this, they're that. I don't like labels as it is. Whether someone says, hey, are you a conservative? Are you a liberal? What religion are you? It's like, are you going through anxiety? Are you going through a depression? Like, it's like, I'm Chad. Like that's what I can tell you. I'm Chad. My mind is one thing each and every day. I'm trying to be better than I was the last. But I don't like labels. I just don't like it because each label was determined by some scientist or someone somewhere, and they drew up the parameters of what causes you to fit inside of that label. And it's like, well, there's people that could be really, really close up here that may be out of the label, and then there's could be people right here, and it's just like I just don't like labels at all.
No, me neither. Well, at times I do. Like, I think like the group identity, it leads to us looking for a confirmation bias. When there's a group you feel firmly attached to, when you look for information, you look for information to confirm that identity you've found, you know? To where I do think there are obviously there are good, worthwhile things to base our identity off from. You know, hard work, discipline, honesty. So I would say much of what I've deconstructed is what defines my identity and what are the things that I truly believe in. You know, so like I think it's the utmost important that an individual has a life philosophy. And I think it's absolutely important that that life philosophy leads to the maximization of like human well-being.
And dude, this is what I appreciate about you so much, because you kind of just set me straight with the labels. Like, I hate labels, but as you say that, yeah, I'm an athlete. I identify as an athlete. I want to be hospitable. I want to be a hard worker. You're 100%. Those are labels that I want to be. I want to be kind. I want to be compassionate. I want to be fit. I want to be fashionable. And those are essentially all labels that, yeah, you're right.
But like, again, what do those well-beings do for your well-being? You know, there's like labels that it's identifying with a thing. Is it like, does that define you? Is that something that's worth being defined by and separated from other people at the cost of?
Yeah, that's a good point, because as I separate and don't give myself these labels of whether it's Christian, Messianic Jewish, or Jewish, is that I'm like out here on no man's land all by myself and Chad, and it's a pretty lonely place to be, because I don't get accepted really from any of these religious circles. And I can feel really lonely at times. That's why Jake and I created this connecting with the creator aspect of the podcast, because I felt like I was really, really far, and I just want to be close to that being, that thing that created me. And I wanted to know what he wants out of my life, but I also want to be able to live a life with purpose, and one that brings me happiness and peace, and to where I can look back on it and be proud of myself and who I was and what I had. And I think that's essentially what we're all striving for. It's just a matter of how we define it and try to come to that.
Absolutely. And what's a good basis for it? I think is an important question.
What's a good basis for it? Yeah.
Did that make any sense?
Yeah. I mean, where do you start? What's a good foundation? What's a good basis? Like, yeah, how do you accumulate that? And I think, like you were sharing, that there's a lot of people that grew up in all these different circumstances, belief systems, and they can be so set in their ways. And sometimes that basis has been very, very helpful for them. Other times that basis has been very difficult for them, and it's something that they may have had to conquer, or if it just took them down into a deeper, darker hole. So trying to figure out what that basis is for each one of us is very important. The main goal and priority is to never stop trying to seek out what that is or what it looks like. This is a journey called life, and to never stop trying, I would say, to progress, to understand, to learn, is the most important things, not for the community, but for each one of us individually.
Right.
Jake, did you have any questions for Isaiah? Is there anything you wanted to say through this podcast?
No, not necessarily. I think I was very interested by what he was saying in the talks of just religion versus philosophy and how sometimes religion kind of leaves that gap of looking at. I'm very similar belief in the perspective of looking at how it affects my well-being, other people's well-being, and if it doesn't negatively affect either of those, then why could that ever be a bad thing? If it doesn't hurt my well-being, if it never hurts anyone else's well-being, then how could that? I just think that's a very interesting way of looking at it, and that's something that I agree with a lot. And sometimes religion can.
Have you ever listened to any of the works of like Sam Harris?
I've heard of him, but no.
Okay. So I would say that he's the individual that I'd say I borrowed that idea from, or he got me thinking about morality in that aspect, because like there was a place where I found, there was a gap of time after deconstructing to where I felt like I kind of needed to find my footing. Like it's like, okay, what do I believe in now?
Mm-hmm.
What do I anchor my identity in? What people should I look for to give me a sense of belonging? And that it did create a lot of loneliness. I would say it was a very depressing, very hard time in my life. I would like to think that I've since then found my footing. No, I have absolutely found my footing. And right now, now the way I see it is like I'm a complicated ape wandering through a chaotic jungle. There's the beginning, there's the end of my life. It's a place that, like this world, it's a place I don't fully understand, nor will I think I will ever fully understand it, but I'm having an experience here, the human experience, conscious experience.
Mm-hmm.
And as I go through this chaotic jungle, there's various tools that the monkey can pick up, and utilize to traverse his way through the jungle. And I think those tools are very important. And I think a life philosophy is a tool that is of the utmost importance in us traversing through life, living for something, something worthwhile, and not only worthwhile, but maybe even exists once we're gone, contribute to something communally, artistically, academically, if you have the resources, something that's going to be here when you're gone. It lives on after you.
Yeah.
Like that. Like, so I'll still like look at the Bible. I'll look at the teachings of Jesus, because I feel it's cool to kind of take a naturalist approach to it. Like, take superstitions aside, anything supernatural aside, and how can I apply this to myself practically? And the idea of afterlife is, I'm agnostic about that. There's some ideas of the afterlife that are more intriguing to me than others. They make more sense, but I don't think we know. And if we cease to exist when we die, maybe something that could be the kingdom of heaven in a naturalist way is the kingdom, the foundations, the things, the bricks that we laid now that are going to continue when we're gone.
And as you guys kind of expressed the ideas of choosing things that don't necessarily hurt us, and if they don't help us or they don't help others or hurt us or hurt others, well, what's the importance? The two things that came to mind is, one, the view of heaven and an afterlife, and trying to theoretically think about these things and come out with factual ideas of, okay, 100% for sure, this is what it's like. No. And so for me, it's like, what's the point of trying to even, I don't know, even have conversations about something that's so unfathomable, where it's like, how do you even prove this concept? And number two would be from a Christian mindset, that saying that the belief in Jesus is what gives you eternal life. And it's just like, how could that idea hurt or help somebody? Like, it's not doing anything. It's just telling you guys that I believe, where in my heart maybe I don't. And so it's like, well, how does someone determine if they actually believe him? Well, they should be, that should show proof and evidence in how they live out their life. Well, if that's the case, then if how they live out their life is proof and evidence of that, then do they need to acknowledge that to other people? And it's just like this great big snowball effect in this circle that we keep going around and around and debate about, well, what should be said, what shouldn't be said. And then we're convicting other people about how they should act and who they should be. And it's just like, wow, yeah, if you really think about that deeply, it's like, does this help me? Does it help others? Does it hurt me? Does it hurt others? And it's like, so many of these things are just hypothetical things that we've really taken deep issue with.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I do think the idea of like there being something after this, it does make sense to me. But again, I don't think it's knowable. And if it's not knowable, to a certain extent, I think it can take away from our well-being when we let it, when we live life not in the present, but specifically living for heaven and like the reward afterwards, when we don't know for sure. I think it can take away from like the experience of like loving people more deeply, appreciating them, seeing this moment we have right now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a unique, once and forever experience, and we need to savor it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a really good point when it comes to maybe spending time with your family. And, oh, well, like, we're going to see each other in the afterlife. And I think that's a hope, and it helps. It's much easier to have that concept in life in when someone's passing and when they're not doing well or they're no longer here on this earth. Like, that is really, really helpful to have that hope instead of having to really deal with the pain and the hurt that them leaving this earth and the possibility of us never seeing them again or never being able to. I mean, geez, like, wow, that's really difficult to try to deal with, but sometimes it's important to really deal with it instead of
That
just using
what the guy from the rat farm said to Jake.
The what?
What the guy from the rat farm said to you.
Yeah.
If you don't deal with this now, you're going to be dealing with this for the rest of your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or feel it now, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, so much of my deconstruction has had to do with not repressing, not lying to myself and saying, I don't really believe this. I don't think this is true. After letting go of that repression, it kind of led to a variety of other things in my life to where it's like, I'm not going to let that hold me back. One was, this is a whole other story, but similar to like something you had experienced, is like my parents were like super opposed to me and my wife getting married. And they threw a whole bunch of obstacles at us in regards to that. And so much of my childhood, I had let people guilt trip me or manipulate me into doing what they wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I repressed what I wanted. And, had I not went against them in doing that, I don't think I'd be self-employed now. It just kind of led to a domino effect of, you know what? for all we know, we have one life. I want to make this life the one that I want it to be. I want it to be the experience that I want it to be, because I don't know if I have another one after that. So I would say that it's definitely helped me live my life more abundantly, and it's helped me maximize my well-being, because it's just really given me a fresh new look at life, but also a deeper appreciation for this mysterious conscious experience that's all unfolding before all three of us.
Mm-hmm.
Isaiah, that's awesome, man. I'm really proud of you for standing up for yourself and doing that, because that life experience has just created so many more opportunities. It's something that I've been dealing with for the last year and a half, dude, is like standing up for myself and continuing to find out who I am. And as I do that and I grow and I realize that Chad's responsible for Chad, I'm the only one going to get me out of there, and I'm the only one going to create success for myself and bring me purpose and happiness. And there isn't anybody else who's going to come by my side and do it for me, that I've been able to really gain that power, man. And it's a great feeling.
You'll always be the biggest advocate for the life that you believe you should live. And
that's
for
true, buddy. Isaiah, do you have any more insights or maybe helpful information you want to share before we sign off tonight? Any last words of wisdom?
So I would say some good sources if someone's currently deconstructing. Really, like if you have questions about the New Testament history regarding that, I would say Bart Ehrman was in particularly very helpful to me. In terms of ethics outside of religion, I would say Sam Harris was very pivotal. In regards to another one in regards to understanding the another approach to the New Testament that you could take. Rabbi Tovia Singer, Let's Get Biblical. He was. I don't really care so much for his disposition. He's a little that rabbi. He's kind of cocky, kind of a little, but very informative. In terms of like a life philosophy outside of religion, I have found Stoicism to be like a great source of wisdom. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, it's a good source of practical wisdom. But really, in the generation that we live in, we have so much information at our fingertips. We have so much information at our fingertips, and we have, we can look into the teachings of the Buddha, the teachings of Marcus Aurelius, the teachings of Jesus, while also, I believe, separating from the dogma, that perhaps held our predecessors, people of previous generations back. We can look at wisdom for the sake of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to make sure all of our listeners understand, you used the word deconstruction numerous times in this episode. I believe I know what you're talking about when you're thinking of that, because when you say it and I hear it, I'm thinking about breaking down all the previous held beliefs that I've had, to where yes is yes 100%, and now I'm reconsidering what is life, what my belief system is, and I'm looking through all these other options. I'm being a little bit more option, and I'm just breaking everything down. Is that what you're describing as deconstructionist, or is there something else? Is there
yeah, absolutely. It's just like, you put a house together, you construct it, you take it apart. Ideally, like, I feel like the process of deconstruction, like if you're taking down your house and you want to preserve it, you're going to take it apart nail by nail. Going to make sure the nails are in the safe place. So, I think that because you touched on the idea of perhaps somebody being too open-minded, to where I feel like sometimes people, when they deconstruct, they can go on this almost, it seems, roller coaster of experiences, to where it's like maybe they're taking it apart too fast and it all comes in all at once. And life just changes so fast. So I would say it's a slow process. Don't move too fast with it. For anybody who's also going through that.
And my one piece of advice, Jake and I are actually reading a book right now called Thinking in Bets, and just read through the chapter where it's talking about our current belief system and how definitive we are on the things that we believe in. And as soon as someone asks you a question, is like, oh well, who invented baseball? Blah 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 blah. Okay, want to bet? Once you're asked that question, it's like, well, I don't know if I want to bet. So when exactly what Isaiah is talking about is coming through all these ideas that you have, taking them down nail by nail. As you're doing that, maybe a great question to ask yourself is, do you want to bet? Like when you hold something so factual and you believe it to be 100% truth, and someone says, well, you want to bet? What amount of money would you be willing to bet on the things that you are 100% sure on? And so that would be my biggest piece of advice, as you're trying to break down your thought system and your belief system and questioning it. Each one of those thoughts that you have, keep asking yourself, want to bet? And see how sure you really are. If you're not, that's where you can kind of go and see whether options are out there, or maybe read and have more assurance of your current belief system. And I think that's why conversations like this are so good, Isaiah, is to be able to understand your belief system, and like, I can start questioning my own belief systems. Like, why do I believe this way? And why do I think this? It's like, it's super helpful because there's a number of things that I need to ask myself better questions of, so I can be better prepared for my mind of what I truly believe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one last thing I would like to touch on is, like, the reason I say it's a slow process is, I feel like some people, they jump out of one boat and they get in another boat. Like, you stop living for something in particular, and you throw away a lot of good moral teachings, a lot of good wisdom. There's still a lot of wisdom in the teachings of Jesus, and you don't have to really throw the baby out with the entire bathwater. There is still a lot of wisdom and helpful philosophy that you can glean from Scripture, and the teachings therein. I think so. I think it is a process you should be careful about and slow about. I'm not saying that about you in particular, but like you and people in general.
Yeah. And I think that's the same way with our relationships and our friendships. I think sometimes if someone wrongs us, we're just so easy to like toss them off. And it's like, man, dude, like this person has been part of your life for all these years, and like they do one small thing, so it's the same way. It's like, it's so easy for us, I think, to just replace things, whether it's a new vehicle or whether it's our mindset or anything like that. And I think what you just shared is really important in all aspects of life.
Right. Right.
Jake, you have anything you want to share to finish us off?
No, I don't have any closing thoughts.
Okay. Well, everybody, we really appreciate you guys listening to this. Isaiah, I appreciate your mindset, everything you had to share today. Again, the beginning of the episode, I said it's your heart, and I think people are going to see exactly what your heart is, and your open-mindedness, you're considerate, you're compassionate, and just how you speak and how you're caring you are, and how you choose your words, and how you know that they will impact other people. So Isaiah, man, I really appreciate you being part of this podcast with us and taking the time to just share who you are and what you've became on this journey, man.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, guys. Have a good night.